Maria Alvarez had finally begun to accept her son Carlos's death after a year of grieving. The 65-year-old widow had settled into a routine of visiting his grave every Sunday without fail. She would arrive just as the morning fog lifted from Sacred Heart Cemetery carrying a bundle of yellow daisies, Carlos's favorite. The cemetery groundskeeper, Mr. Chen, would nod silently as she passed, respecting the quiet dignity she maintained despite her pain. On these visits, Maria would carefully replace the previous week's wilted flowers with fresh ones, wipe dust from the simple granite headstone, and then sit on the small wooden bench she had installed beside the grave. For almost an hour, she would talk to Carlos as if he were sitting across from her, updating him on family news, neighborhood gossip, and her ongoing battle with the stubborn rose bushes he had planted in their backyard before his accident. "Your sister Elena is pregnant again," she told him one Sunday in October. "A boy this time. They're thinking of naming him after you." She paused, running her fingers over the engraved letters of his name. "I told her it's bad luck, but you know how she is. Just as stubborn as you were." These one-sided conversations had become her lifeline, a way to keep Carlos present in her world. Friends worried she wasn't moving on, but these weekly visits actually helped Maria build a fragile new normal. She had even started volunteering at the community center 3 days a week, teaching older adults how to use computers, something Carlos had always encouraged her to do. "Mrs. Alvarez, you're becoming our tech expert," the center director had joked just last week, after Maria successfully helped a group of seniors set up their first email accounts. Life wasn't good, but it was at least manageable, until the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in November. Maria was washing dishes after a simple dinner of beans and rice when the phone rang. She dried her hands on her apron before answering. "Hello?" she said, expecting it to be Elena, with another question about baby clothes. The line crackled with static. Then a voice, weak, hesitant but horribly familiar, came through. "Mom? It's me." Maria's legs gave way. She sank to the kitchen floor, the phone clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. The voice sounded exactly like Carlos, not just similar but identical, with the same slight stutter when he was nervous, the same soft way he said "Mom." "Who is this?" she demanded, anger rising through her shock. "This is a terrible joke." "Mom, please listen," the voice continued. "I know this sounds crazy. I don't understand what's happening either. But it's me, Carlos. I'm not dead." Maria's hand shook violently. "My son is buried in Sacred Heart Cemetery. I visit him every week. How dare you?" "The blue bike you got me for my 10th birthday, the voice interrupted. "I crashed it the same day because I was showing off for Linda, from next door. I made you promise never to tell Dad because I was embarrassed." Maria's breath caught. This was something she and Carlos had never told anyone. One of those small, private memories that existed only between mother and son. That doesn't mean anything," she whispered, but her certainty was crumbling. "The night before my high school graduation," the voice continued, "I told you I was scared to leave home for college. You made hot chocolate with cinnamon the way Grandma used to, and we stayed up until 3 a.m. watching old black and white movies. We never told Dad or Elena because they'd make fun of us for being sentimental." Tears streamed down Maria's face as she pressed the phone closer to her ear. No one else could possibly know these details. "Carlos," she whispered. "But how? Where are you?" "I don't know exactly," he said, his voice breaking. "Sometimes I can see a hospital ceiling. Sometimes there are doctors. But it's all foggy. Mom, you need to help me. My grave, you need to dig it up." "Dig up your grave?" Maria repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "Carlos, that's impossible. I saw you in the coffin. At the funeral." "That wasn't me," he insisted, sudden urgency in his voice. "Mom, something terrible happened. There's been a mistake. I don't have much time to talk. They give me something that makes me sleep. But I had to reach you." "Who gives you something?" "Where are you?" Maria asked desperately, but the line was already filling with static again. "Mom, please." Carlos's voice came through faintly. Dig up the grave, you'll see I'm not there, find me. Then the connection went dead. Maria sat motionless on the kitchen floor, the phone silent in her hand, for almost an hour. The call had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had torn open every wound she'd spent a year trying to heal. It couldn't be real. It had to be some cruel prank. Or perhaps she was finally losing her mind, as Elena had gently suggested might happen when she found Maria talking to Carlos's photo at 2 a.m. several months ago. But those memories, those private, perfect memories that only Carlos would know. She finally pulled herself up from the floor and made a cup of strong coffee, her hands still trembling. As the night deepened, Maria sat at her kitchen table surrounded by photo albums and Carlos's belongings that she'd carefully stored in boxes but couldn't bear to give away. She opened his old high school yearbook, touching his smiling face in the senior portrait. Carlos had been a handsome boy, tall like his father, with the same warm brown eyes and easy smile that made people instantly trust him. The accident had been so senseless, a drunk driver on a rainy night, a head-on collision that left the other driver with minor injuries while Carlos was rushed to the hospital with severe trauma. Maria remembered the hospital waiting room, the hours of uncertainty, and then the doctor's face as he approached. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Alvarez. We did everything we could." She remembered viewing Carlos's body, his face so damaged that she'd almost convinced herself it wasn't him. But the birthmark on his right hand, the one shaped like a tiny crescent moon, that had confirmed it was her son, or had it. A terrible thought began to form. What if there had been a mistake? The hospital had been chaotic that night. A bus accident had brought in multiple trauma patients at the same time. Carlos's wallet and ID had been destroyed in the crash. What if... No, she was being ridiculous. Grief was making her desperate for any sliver of hope, even something as impossible as this. The phone rang again at exactly 3:17 a.m., startling Maria from her thoughts. She lunged for it. "Carlos? Mom, I don't have long," came the same voice, clearer now. "I need you to remember something. The night of the accident, I was wearing Dad's old watch, the gold one he left me. Check the personal effects they gave you. It won't be there." Maria rushed to her bedroom closet where she kept a small box containing the items the hospital had returned: Carlos's damaged cell phone, his keys, the silver chain he always wore. With shaking hands, she emptied the contents onto her bed. The watch wasn't there. But that didn't necessarily mean anything. It could have been destroyed or stolen after the crash. "Carlos, even if I believed you, and I'm not saying I do, I can't just dig up a grave. There are laws. I would need permission." "Look into the hospital," Carlos said urgently. "Sacred Heart Memorial. There was a mix-up with patients that night. And Mom, check Dad's desk. The middle drawer has a false bottom. I found it years ago but never told anyone. There's a business card there for a lawyer, Dad's friend Miguel. He can help you." The line went dead again. Maria stood frozen, the phone in her hand, her mind racing. How could the caller know about the hidden compartment in her late husband's desk? She had never known about it herself. With a sudden determination, she went to the small home office that had remained largely untouched since her husband Roberto's death 8 years ago. The antique oak desk stood against the wall, still covered, with his old papers and books. Maria opened the middle drawer and felt around the edges until her fingers found a small indentation. When she pressed it, the bottom of the drawer popped up, revealing a hidden space beneath. Inside was a business card, yellowed with age, for Miguel Ortiz, attorney at law. Maria sank into Roberto's old chair, the card clutched in her hand, as the first light of dawn filtered through the window. Either she was losing her mind, or her son, her Carlos whom she had mourned and buried, was somehow alive and trying to reach her. Either way, she knew she couldn't ignore this. Tomorrow she would call Miguel Ortiz, and she would begin the impossible task of asking the world to believe that her dead son had asked her to dig up his grave. No one believed Maria. How could they? Her story sounded like something from a late-night movie, not real life in their quiet town. When she first told Elena about the phone calls, her daughter's face had shifted from confusion to worry to heartbreak. Mom, Elena had said gently, taking Maria's hands across the kitchen table. I'm worried about you. These calls, they can't be real, you know that, right? Maria pulled her hands away. I know how it sounds, but Elena, he knew things. Private things only Carlos would know. Elena sighed, rubbing her pregnant belly unconsciously. Phone scammers are clever these days. They find information online, they trick people, especially people who are vulnerable. She hesitated. Have you been taking your sleep medication? Dr. Lopez said lack of sleep can cause. I'm not hallucinating, Maria snapped, then immediately regretted her tone when she saw Elena flinch. I'm sorry, but I'm not crazy and I'm not being scammed. It's Carlos. The conversation ended with Elena calling her husband to pick her up early. As she left, Maria overheard her daughter whispering, I think we need to talk to Dr. Lopez about adjusting her medication. Maria's next stop had been the police station, a small brick building on Main Street where Officer Tom Riley had known the Alvarez family for decades. He'd even attended Carlos's funeral. Mrs. Alvarez, Officer Riley said, awkwardly offering her a cup of watery coffee in a styrofoam cup. I understand you're going through a difficult time. Please, Tom. You've known me for 30 years. Have I ever seemed unstable to you? Maria asked, leaving the coffee untouched. Officer Riley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. No, ma'am. But what you're describing, we can't investigate based on phone calls that might be pranks. Have you considered that someone might be taking advantage of you? The caller knew about a hidden compartment in my husband's desk that even I didn't know existed, Maria insisted. He knew private conversations between me and Carlos, things that were never on social media or told to anyone else. Riley's expression remained sympathetic but unmoved. If you'd like, we can trace the calls, see if we can identify who's harassing you. But Mrs. Alvarez, we can't request an exhumation order based on this. No judge would sign it. Maria left the station feeling defeated. As she walked slowly home, she noticed people watching her, whispering. News traveled fast in small towns. By nightfall, everyone would know that Maria Alvarez was hearing voices from her dead son. But the calls kept coming. Always brief, always late at night or early morning. Each time Carlos would share another memory or detail only he would know, then beg her to keep trying to help him. After the 5th call, Maria decided to visit the hospital where Carlos had been declared dead. Sacred Heart Memorial was a sprawling complex on the edge of town that had expanded rapidly in recent years after being bought by a large healthcare corporation. The administrative offices were a maze of beige corridors and closed doors. Maria had made an appointment with the records department, claiming she needed copies of Carlos's medical files for insurance purposes. Mrs. Alvarez? A thin woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose called from behind a desk stacked with folders. I'm Rita Gonzalez. I understand you're looking for your son's records? Maria nodded, clutching her purse tightly. Yes, from last November, the night he died. Mrs. Gonzalez typed something into her computer, frowning slightly. I'm showing that those records were already released to you 3 months after the incident. You signed for them. I need another copy, Maria said quickly. The insurance company lost them. More typing, more frowning. That's strange. I'm seeing a note that these records are flagged. Any additional requests need approval from administration. She looked up. That's unusual for a closed case. Flagged? What does that mean? Maria asked, her heart beating faster. Probably just a privacy thing, Mrs. Gonzalez said, but she looked uncertain. Let me call upstairs. While the records clerk made her call, Maria glanced around the office. On a bulletin board behind the desk, she noticed a newspaper clipping. The headline read, Sacred Heart Memorial under investigation for patient identification. Procedures. When Mrs. Gonzalez hung up, Maria pointed to the article. What's that about? The clerk glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. Nothing to do with your son's case, I'm sure. There was an incident a few months back. 2 patients with similar names were mixed up. One was given the wrong medication. It was a big mess. She straightened up. Administration says they'll review your request, but it might take a few weeks. A few weeks? Maria repeated. But I need those records now. I'm sorry, Mrs. Alvarez. That's the best I can do." As Maria turned to leave, defeated again, a young man in scrubs hurried into the office, dropping a stack of files on the counter. "Here are the transfer forms from last night, Rita," he said breathlessly, "including the special cases from the research wing." "Thanks, Ben," Mrs. Gonzalez replied. "Oh, Mrs. Alvarez, this is Ben Chen. His father is the groundskeeper at Sacred Heart Cemetery." Maria froze. "Mr. Chen's son? You work here?" Ben smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am. Dad's been at the cemetery for 20 years, but I preferred medicine to gardening." An idea suddenly formed in Maria's mind. "Ben, your father knows me. I visit my son's grave every Sunday." Ben nodded. "He's mentioned you, says you're very dedicated." "I need to talk to you," Maria said urgently. "Privately, about something important." Ben looked confused but nodded. "My shift ends at 4. I could meet you at the coffee shop across the street." At 4:15, Maria sat nervously at a corner table in the nearly empty coffee shop. When Ben arrived, still in his scrubs, she wasted no time. "I think there was a mistake with my son's case," she said bluntly. "I think he might still be alive." To her surprise, Ben didn't immediately dismiss her. Instead, he looked troubled. "Mrs. Alvarez, that's a very serious thing to say. I know how it sounds. But I've been receiving phone calls. From Carlos. He knows things only he would know." Ben was silent for a long moment, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need someone who might believe me. Someone with access to the hospital." Maria leaned forward. "That article in the records office, about patients being mixed up. What really happened?" Ben glanced around nervously before answering. "It was worse than they said publicly. There were actually 3 cases identified where patients were incorrectly tagged in the system. One was just a billing error, but the other 2," he trailed off. "The other 2 what?" Maria pressed. "One patient was given treatment meant for someone else. He nearly died. The other..." Ben hesitated. "The other was declared dead and released to a funeral home before anyone realized the mistake. They caught it before anything happened, but it was close." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. "So it could happen? A living person could be mistakenly declared dead?" "In theory, yes," Ben admitted, "especially in mass casualty situations. The night your son came in, it was chaos. A bus had crashed on the highway. 12 serious traumas arrived at once." "Ben," Maria said, her voice shaking, "I need to know if there's any possibility my son is still alive. Could there be records somewhere? A patient with no identification, maybe?" Ben looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Alvarez, what you're asking? I could lose my job." "Please," Maria whispered. "If it was your mother asking, what would you want someone to do?" After a long silence, Ben spoke again, his voice barely audible. "There's a detective who investigated the identification issues. His name is Ray Patel. He's not hospital staff, so he might talk to you. He scribbled a number on a napkin. I never gave you this." 2 days later, Maria sat across from Detective Ray Patel in his cluttered office at the county police headquarters. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a kind face. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said after listening to her story without interruption, "I understand why the local police dismissed your concerns. But I've been investigating Sacred Heart Memorial for 6 months now, and I've found some irregularities." Maria's heart leapt. "What kind of irregularities?" "Patient records that don't match hospital stays, billing for procedures that were never performed, and a disturbing pattern of patients being transferred to what they call the research wing without proper documentation." He tapped his pen against a thick file. "The hospital received a major grant 3 years ago for experimental treatments for traumatic brain injuries. The results they've reported are remarkable, almost too good to be true." "You think they're lying about their research?" Maria asked, confused about how this connected to Carlos. "Not lying exactly, but perhaps cutting corners on consent protocols." Detective Patel looked at her intently. Mrs. Alvarez, was your son an organ donor? The question caught her off guard. Yes. He had it on his license. But they told me his organs couldn't be used because of how long it took to get him to the hospital. Patel nodded slowly. That's interesting. Because according to the records I've been able to access, someone matching your son's blood type and general description was admitted to the research wing the day after your son supposedly died. Maria felt dizzy. Are you saying you believe me? You think Carlos might be alive? I'm saying it's possible there was a misidentification, Patel said carefully. Possible enough that I'm willing to help you petition for an exhumation order. But Mrs. Alvarez, I need you to understand, even if there was a mistake, the person in that research wing might not be your son. And if the coffin is empty, it doesn't automatically prove anything. Evidence can be complicated. I understand, Maria said, although her mind was already racing ahead, picturing a reunion with Carlos. What do we do now? Detective Patel closed the file and looked at her with serious eyes. Now, Mrs. Alvarez, we prepare for a legal battle, because if Sacred Heart Memorial made a mistake this serious, they're going to fight very, very hard to keep it buried. For the first time in over a year, Maria felt something she'd thought was gone forever. Hope. It was fragile and frightening, but it was there, like a tiny flame that could either die out or grow into a blaze that would illuminate the truth, no matter how painful or complicated that truth might be. The battle to obtain an exhumation order became more challenging than Maria could have ever imagined. What started as her private quest for truth quickly turned into a media sensation that divided the entire town. Local news vans parked outside her modest home, reporters calling at all hours asking for interviews. Some neighbors brought casseroles and offered support, while others crossed the street to avoid talking to her. Mom, this has gone too far, Elena said during a tense visit, her pregnancy now in its final weeks. She placed a protective hand on her rounded belly as she paced Maria's living room. People are talking about nothing else. They're calling you crazy. They're calling our whole family crazy. Let them talk, Maria replied, sorting through a stack of legal documents spread across her coffee table. Detective Patel believes me. That's what matters. A detective who's been obsessed with that hospital for months. Elena threw up her hands in frustration. He's just using you to further his own investigation. Maria looked up sharply. He's the only person besides me who's taking these phone calls seriously. These mysterious calls that only you receive that are never long enough to trace, that always happen when you're alone, Elena countered, her voice breaking. Do you know what my doctor asked me yesterday? If there's a history of mental illness in our family? The words hung heavy in the air between them. Maria stood slowly, gathering her dignity around her like armor. I understand why you're scared, she said quietly. But I'm not imagining things, and I'm not stopping until I know the truth. Elena left in tears, and Maria didn't blame her. If their positions were reversed, she might have reacted the same way. The idea of Carlos being alive after all this time was almost too much to hope for, too painful to believe in case it wasn't true. The legal proceedings moved slowly. Maria had followed Ben's advice and contacted Miguel Ortiz, the lawyer whose card she'd found in Roberto's desk. He was retired now but agreed to help when she explained the situation. Roberto was one of my closest friends, Miguel had said during their first meeting, his hands gnarled with arthritis but his mind still sharp. And I was at Carlos's funeral. If there's even a small chance what you're saying is true, we need to pursue it. Together with Detective Patel, they filed a petition for exhumation with the county court. The hospital immediately sent their legal team to fight it. The first hearing was brief, but intense. Maria sat beside Miguel, trying to appear calm while the hospital's attorney, a polished woman in an expensive suit, argued that the petition should be thrown out. Your Honor, this is a case built on grief and nothing more, the attorney said. Mrs. Alvarez is clearly still processing the tragic loss of her son, and these alleged phone calls are a manifestation of that grief. The trauma her family would experience from an unnecessary exhumation would be severe and lasting. Judge Williams, an older man with thick glasses and a thoughtful expression, turned to Miguel. Mr. Ortiz, do you have any concrete evidence beyond these reported phone calls? Miguel stood leaning slightly on his cane. Your Honor, we have documentation showing significant irregularities in Sacred Heart Memorial's patient identification procedures during the period in question. Detective Patel's ongoing investigation has revealed at least 2 other cases of patient misidentification during the same month Mr. Alvarez died. The judge nodded slowly. I'll review Detective Patel's files before making a decision. Court is adjourned until next week. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed around Maria, shouting questions. Detective Patel helped her through the crowd to his car. You did well in there, he said as they drove away. But the hospital's fighting harder than I expected. They've brought in their top legal team from headquarters. Why would they fight so hard if they have nothing to hide? Maria asked. Patel's expression was grim. Exactly the question I've been asking myself. That night the phone rang at exactly 2:13 a.m. Maria, who had been lying awake, grabbed it immediately. Carlos? Mom. His voice sounded weaker than before. Are you making progress? Yes, she said urgently. We've filed for an exhumation order, but Carlos, I need more proof. Something I can show Detective Patel, something concrete. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of labored breathing. The watch, Carlos finally said. Dad's watch. Check the hospital inventory list from that night. It should be there even if they never gave it to you. I've tried to get your records, but they're blocking me, Maria explained. Try. Carlos's voice faded in and out. Try patient 723. I saw it on a chart. They might have filed everything under that number instead of my name. Patient 723, Maria repeated, grabbing a pen to write it down. Carlos, where are you? Give me something I can tell the detective. Don't know exactly. White rooms. Machines. Sometimes I hear helicopters. The connection was getting worse, breaking up. Mom, be careful. The doctor in charge. His name is Bryant. He comes at night. Always at night. The line went dead. Maria sat motionless, the phone clutched in her hand, repeating the new information in her mind so she wouldn't forget it. Patient 723. Dr. Bryant. Helicopters. The next morning she called Detective Patel. We need to look for records under patient 723, she told. Him. And there's a doctor named Bryant we should investigate. Bryant? Patel sounded surprised. Dr. Andrew Bryant? He's the head of neurology at Sacred Heart and the principal investigator on their traumatic brain injury research. How did your caller know that name? A chill ran through Maria. This is real, she whispered. This is really happening. With this new information, Detective Patel managed to obtain a warrant to search specific hospital records related to patient 723. What he found was enough to convince Judge Williams to call a second hearing. The courtroom was packed this time. News of the case had spread beyond their town, picking up national attention. Maria noticed several unfamiliar faces in expensive suits sitting behind the hospital's attorney. Judge Williams called the court to order, his expression unusually stern. I've reviewed the evidence presented by Detective Patel, he began, including records associated with a patient 723, admitted to Sacred Heart Memorial on November 15th of last year. The same night, Carlos Alvarez was reportedly pronounced dead. The intake forms for patient 723 list personal effects, including, notably, a gold watch matching the description of a family heirloom belonging to the Alvarez family. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The hospital's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, this proves nothing. Patient confidentiality laws prevent us from discussing other patients, but there could be many explanations for this coincidence. Indeed, the judge agreed. Which is why I've also reviewed the medical examiner's report from the night in question. He picked up a document. The report notes, severe facial trauma making visual identification difficult and relies heavily on personal effects for confirmation of identity. Yet there is no mention of a gold watch among those effects. The hospital's attorney seemed briefly flustered but recovered quickly. Your Honor, in the chaos of a mass casualty event, small items can be misplaced. Perhaps, Judge Williams said, "but I find sufficient cause to grant the petition for exhumation. The procedure will take place 1 week from today under court supervision." The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo through Maria's very bones. She had won the first battle, but somehow she knew the war was just beginning. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. The phone didn't ring, and she found herself staring at it, willing it to come to life with Carlos's voice. When dawn came, she made coffee and sat by the window, watching as a black car she didn't recognize parked across the street. A man in a dark suit remained inside, occasionally speaking into a phone. Around noon, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, Detective Patel stood there looking worried. "Mrs. Alvarez, may I come in?" Once inside, he checked the windows before speaking. "The hospital administrator, Richard Cooper, has suddenly taken a leave of absence. His secretary says he flew to the Cayman Islands last night." "What does that mean?" Maria asked. "It could mean nothing," Patel said carefully. "Or it could mean he's running because he knows what we're about to find." Maria felt a flutter of fear. "Do you think I'm in danger?" "Probably not," Patel said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But I'd feel better if you stayed with your daughter until the exhumation." "Elena doesn't believe me," Maria reminded him. "And she's due any day now. I don't want to upset her further." Patel frowned. "Then I'll arrange for patrol cars to drive by regularly. And Mrs. Alvarez, don't answer the door for anyone you don't know, not until this is over." After Patel left, Maria called Elena, wanting to hear her daughter's voice. The call went to voicemail. She tried Miguel, but his housekeeper said he was at a doctor's appointment. With a growing sense of isolation, Maria walked from room to room, checking locks on windows and doors. As evening fell, the black car was still parked across the street. Maria drew her curtains and tried to focus on a book, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming exhumation. What would they find? An empty coffin, as Carlos had implied? Or would her son's body be there, proving that the phone calls were somehow an elaborate hoax or a product of her desperate imagination? The phone rang, startling her so badly she dropped her book. It wasn't her house phone this time, but her cell. The number was blocked. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Mrs. Alvarez." The voice was male, but definitely not Carlos. It was deeper, more confident. "My name is Dr. Andrew Bryant. I think we should talk." Maria's heart hammered in her chest. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important," Dr. Bryant replied smoothly. "What's important is that I believe I can help clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" Maria's voice shook slightly. "This idea that your son might still be alive. It's causing unnecessary pain for everyone involved. If you'd allow me to explain the medical facts." "Why are you calling me directly?" Maria interrupted. "Why not speak through the hospital's lawyers?" There was a brief pause. "I sympathize with your situation, Mrs. Alvarez. Mother to mother, I wanted to reach out personally to help you find closure." The slip was small but revealing. "I don't have a mother," Maria said quietly. "She died when I was a child." This time the pause was longer. "I meant parent to parent. My point is—" "No," Maria cut him off again. "Your point is that you're worried about what we'll find when we open that grave. Well, Dr. Bryant, in 6 days we'll know the truth." She hung up before he could respond, her hands trembling but her resolve stronger than ever. Whoever this doctor was, whatever he was hiding, she would find out. For Carlos. The night before the scheduled exhumation, Maria sat alone in her living room, watching the clock tick toward midnight. The black car had finally left around dinner time, but she still felt watched, vulnerable. The phone hadn't rung again. Not her cell, not the house phone. No more calls from Carlos, no more threats from Dr. Bryant. Just as she was considering, trying to sleep, headlights swept across her front window. A car had pulled into her driveway. Maria froze, listening as footsteps approached her front door. Then came a frantic knocking. "Mrs. Alvarez, it's Ben Chen. Please, I need to talk to you. It's about your son." Maria hesitated at the door, Detective Patel's warning echoing in her mind. But Ben had been the first person to take her seriously, the one who connected her with Detective Patel. After peering through the peephole to confirm it was really him, she unlocked the door. Ben Chen stood on her porch, his hospital scrubs wrinkled, and his eyes wild with fear. His hands shook as he glanced repeatedly over his shoulder at the empty street. "Mrs. Alvarez, I'm sorry to come so late," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they're destroying records. Right now. I saw them." Maria pulled him inside quickly, locking the door behind him. "Slow down, Ben. Who's destroying what records?" Dr. Bryant and his team. Ben collapsed onto her couch, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "I was working a double shift. Around 10 o'clock, I went to the basement to get some supplies, and I saw them in the records room. They were loading files into bins marked for shredding. When Bryant saw me, he said they were just clearing old files, but I recognized the label on one of them. Patient 723. Maria's blood ran cold. "The same number Carlos mentioned." Ben nodded. "I pretended I hadn't noticed anything strange and went about my business. But then I overheard Bryant on the phone saying they needed to clean everything up before tomorrow's cemetery situation." He looked at Maria with terrified eyes. "They know I saw them. When I tried to leave after my shift, security stopped me. Said Dr. Bryant wanted to speak with me. I said I needed to use the bathroom first and slipped out the back exit." "Have you called Detective Patel?" Maria asked, already reaching for her phone. "I tried. It went straight to voicemail." Ben stood up, too agitated to remain seated. "Mrs. Alvarez, I think they're planning something for tomorrow. Something to stop the exhumation or hide whatever's in that grave." Maria dialed Patel's number again, but just as Ben had said, it went straight to voicemail. She left a message explaining what Ben had told her, then tried Miguel Ortiz. His housekeeper answered, sounding half asleep, and promised to have him call back in the morning. "It might be too late by morning," Maria said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the panic rising within her. "What do we do?" Ben paced the living room. "We need to document what's happening. If they're destroying evidence, we need proof." He stopped suddenly, turning to Maria with a determined expression. "We need to go to the cemetery, now." "The cemetery? Why?" "Because whatever they're trying to hide is in that grave," Ben explained. "What if they try to tamper with it tonight? The court order doesn't take effect until morning. Right now, there's nothing legally stopping them." Maria wanted to argue that no one would dare interfere with a grave, but she'd come too far to be naive now. If Sacred Heart Hospital was willing to destroy medical records, what else might they do? "I'll drive," she said, grabbing her car keys. The drive to Sacred Heart Cemetery was tense and silent. The small town was asleep, streets empty except for the occasional raccoon or stray cat. Maria took back roads, avoiding main streets where police might be patrolling. The last thing they needed was to be pulled over and delayed. As they approached the cemetery gates, Ben motioned for her to cut the headlights and park on a side road. "We should walk from here," he whispered. "Just in case someone's watching." The cemetery was eerily quiet, moonlight casting long shadows across the gravestones. Maria led the way, knowing the path to Carlos's grave by heart. She'd walked it every Sunday for a year, after all. But tonight, with the trees swaying in the gentle breeze and stars twinkling overhead, the familiar journey felt sinister. "There," Ben pointed suddenly. "Is that light coming from the maintenance shed?" A faint glow spilled from the windows of a small building near the center of the cemetery. As they watched, a shadow moved across the light. "Someone's in there," Maria whispered. "Maybe just the night watchman?" Ben shook his head. "The cemetery doesn't have night security. Dad locks up when he leaves at 6. They crept closer, staying low behind the gravestones. When they were about 50 yards from the shed, the door opened and 2 figures emerged. Even from a distance, Maria could see they wore dark clothing and carried what looked like shovels and a large duffel bag. "They're heading toward the north section," Ben whispered. "Where is your son's grave?" "North section, row 17, Maria replied, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The 2 figures moved purposefully through the cemetery, occasionally consulting what appeared to be a small flashlight. Maria and Ben followed at a safe distance using the gravestones for cover. When the figures stopped, Maria recognized exactly where they were, directly in front of Carlos's granite headstone. "That's it," she whispered. "That's Carlos's grave." Without hesitation, the two figures began digging, their shovels biting into the earth with practiced efficiency. Maria started to move forward, but Ben held her back. "Wait," he hissed. "We need evidence. If we confront them now, it'll be our word against theirs." He pulled out his cell phone. "I'm going to record this." For nearly 30 minutes, they watched as the two individuals dug deeper and deeper into Carlos's grave. Finally, there was a hollow thud, the sound of a shovel hitting wood. "They've reached the coffin," Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face. It was one thing to suspect something was wrong with her son's burial, another entirely to watch strangers violating his resting place in the dead of night. The figures leaned into the hole, and with some effort, lifted what appeared to be the coffin lid. One of them shone a flashlight inside, then turned to the other with a nod. They reached into the duffel bag and removed something large and heavy, several sandbags, from the look of it. "They're putting something in the coffin," Ben whispered, his phone still recording. "But why would they?" "Because it's empty," Maria realized with a jolt. "They're filling an empty coffin with weight so no one will notice when it's opened. Tomorrow." Just then, headlights swept across the distant cemetery entrance. A vehicle was approaching, its engine breaking the night's silence. "We need to get out of here," Ben urged, pulling Maria back toward the tree line. "But they're tampering with evidence," Maria protested. "And we have it recorded. But if they catch us here, we'll never make it to the exhumation tomorrow." Reluctantly, Maria allowed Ben to lead her away from the scene, circling wide around the approaching vehicle. They reached her car without being spotted and drove away with the headlights still off until they were safely on the main road. "We need to show this to someone right away," Ben said, checking the video on his phone. "This proves they're hiding something." Maria nodded, her mind racing. "Miguel, we'll go to Miguel's house. He'll know what to do." Miguel Ortiz was not pleased to be woken at 3 a.m, but his annoyance quickly turned to shock as they showed him the video. "This changes everything," the elderly lawyer said, his arthritic fingers tapping thoughtfully against his cane. "They've now committed a crime we can prove, tampering with evidence under a court order." "The court order doesn't technically start until morning," Ben pointed out. Miguel smiled grimly. "That's a technicality their expensive lawyers might argue, but no judge will look kindly on midnight grave tampering." He reached for his phone. "I'm calling Judge Williams at home. This can't wait until morning." By dawn, the scene at Sacred Heart Cemetery was chaos. Judge Williams had issued an emergency order to secure the gravesite and moved the exhumation up to first light. Police tape cordoned off a wide area around Carlos's grave, and officers stood guard at regular intervals. News vans lined the cemetery entrance, reporters speaking urgently into cameras. Maria stood to one side with Miguel, Ben, and a grim-faced Detective Patel, who had finally responded to their calls. "I'm sorry I was unreachable last night," Patel said quietly. "Someone slashed my car tires and stole my phone from inside. Almost like they didn't want me to be here." "Will this delay the exhumation?" Maria asked anxiously. "On the contrary," Miguel replied. "Judge Williams is furious. He's ordered it to proceed immediately with full police documentation, and he's issued warrants for Dr. Bryant and the hospital administrator." As they spoke, a county medical examiner's van pulled up to the police line. Officials in white coveralls emerged carrying equipment. "It's happening," Maria whispered, both terrified and relieved that the moment of truth had finally arrived. The exhumation process was methodical and solemn, despite the unusual circumstances. The medical examiner supervised as workers carefully removed the freshly disturbed dirt. Within an hour, they had exposed the coffin, a polished mahogany casket that Maria remembered selecting in a fog of grief just over a year ago. The cemetery fell silent as the examiner signaled for the coffin to be opened. Maria held her breath, her hands clasped so tightly that her nails bit into her palms. The lid was slowly, carefully raised. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Inside the coffin were not human remains, but several large sandbags strategically placed to simulate a body's weight. Just as Maria had suspected, just as Carlos had told her, the coffin was empty. "Document everything," Judge Williams ordered from where he stood at the edge of the police tape. "I want photographs, measurements, sample collection, the works." Maria felt lightheaded, swaying on her feet. Ben quickly moved to support her, helping her to a nearby bench. "He was telling the truth," she whispered. "Carlos is alive somewhere." Detective Patel approached, his expression a mix of shock and vindication. "Mrs. Alvarez, I owe you an apology for ever doubting you. I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of police work." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Now," Patel said, his jaw set with determination, "we find your son, and we hold accountable everyone who is involved in this, whatever this is." As they spoke, a commotion broke out near the cemetery entrance. Police officers were escorting a handcuffed man toward a waiting cruiser. Even from a distance, Maria recognized Dr. Bryant's tall figure and distinctive silver hair. They found him trying to board a private plane at the regional airport, Patel explained, following her gaze. "He's not talking yet, but he will. People, like him, always do when they're facing serious charges." Maria nodded absently, her eyes fixed on the empty coffin. For a year, she had visited this spot every Sunday, talking to a son who wasn't there, grieving by an empty box while Carlos was somewhere else, alive, conscious enough to remember their shared history, somehow able to reach out to her. "Carlos," she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I'm coming for you. Hold on just a little longer." 6 weeks after the shocking discovery at Sacred Heart Cemetery, Maria stood nervously outside the doors of a private medical facility called New Horizons Rehabilitation Center. Located in a neighboring state, the unmarked building sat behind tall security fences in a wooded area, far from prying eyes. Few people knew of its existence, and even fewer had been granted access to its guarded halls. "Are you ready, Mrs. Alvarez?" Detective Patel asked gently, standing beside her. Maria nodded, unable to trust her voice. After everything they'd been through, the empty coffin, the media frenzy that followed, Dr. Bryant's arrest, the hospital administrator's scrambling denials, this moment felt almost unreal, like a dream she might wake from at any second. "Remember what I told you," Patel continued. "He's been through a traumatic experience. He may not be exactly as you remember him." "I know," Maria whispered, "but he's alive. That's all that matters." The journey to this moment had been a whirlwind of legal battles, revelations, and heartbreak. In the days following the exhumation, Sacred Heart Hospital had gone into full damage control mode, issuing carefully worded statements about possible procedural irregularities, while denying any deliberate wrongdoing. But Dr. Bryant, facing serious criminal charges and the end of his medical career, had eventually made a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for reduced charges, he revealed the existence of an experimental research program called Project Lazarus, dedicated to testing breakthrough therapies for patients with severe traumatic brain injuries. The program itself wasn't illegal, Miguel had explained to Maria after one particularly grueling court hearing. The hospital had proper approvals for the research. What was illegal was how they selected their patients. As it turned out, Dr. Bryant and a small team of specialists had been identifying patients with catastrophic brain trauma, who they believed had a small chance of recovery with experimental treatments. Rather than going through proper channels, obtaining family consent, documenting transfers, following ethical protocols, they had taken shortcuts. In cases where the patient was a registered organ donor like Carlos, they would sometimes declare the patient dead, switch identification records, and transfer them to the secret research facility under a different name. They were playing God, Detective Patel had said bitterly, deciding who deserved a second chance and who didn't, without involving families or following the law. The truth had been even more shocking than Maria had imagined. According to Bryant's testimony, There had been 17 patients resurrected through the program over 3 years. Some, like Carlos, had eventually regained consciousness, while others remained in vegetative states despite the treatments. When patients showed signs of improvement, the researchers found themselves in an impossible position of their own making. How to return a dead person to their family without admitting what they'd done. So they kept them hidden, Maria had realized with horror. Even after they woke up. Dr. Bryant claimed they had been planning to eventually reintroduce the recovered patients as miracle cases discovered in rural hospitals with amnesia or misidentified remains. But the logistics of creating believable cover stories had proven challenging, and meanwhile, the patients remained isolated, confused, and held against their will. The sound of the facility door opening snapped Maria back to the present moment. A woman in a white coat greeted them with a somber nod. "Mrs. Alvarez, Detective Patel. I'm Dr. Torres, the new clinical director. We're ready for you." The facility was nothing like Maria had expected. Instead of the sterile, clinical environment she'd imagined, New Horizons resembled a high-end nursing home with warm colors, comfortable seating areas, and large windows overlooking gardens. The only hints of its true nature were the security keypads at every doorway and the careful watchfulness of the staff. All the patients from Project Lazarus were transferred here after the investigation began, Dr. Torres explained as she led them down a quiet hallway. "We've been working to identify them correctly, contact families, and provide appropriate rehabilitation services. It's been challenging, to say the least." "How many are here?" Patel asked. 11 patients survived the transfer. 3 have already been reunited with their families. The others are still undergoing assessment or waiting for identification confirmation. Dr. Torres paused outside a door marked Therapy Room 3 and turned to Maria with kind eyes. "Mrs. Alvarez, I should prepare you. Carlos has made remarkable progress, but he still struggles with some aspects of memory and motor function. The treatments he received were experimental for a reason. We're still learning about their long-term effects." Maria nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. "I understand. I just want to see my son." Dr. Torres opened the door, revealing a bright room with floor-to-ceiling windows. A physical therapist stood beside a man in a wheelchair, guiding him through what appeared to be hand coordination exercises. The man's back was to the door, but Maria would have recognized the shape of those shoulders anywhere. "Carlos," she called softly, her voice breaking. The man in the wheelchair froze, then slowly turned his head. His face was thinner than she remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down toward his jaw, evidence of the accident that had nearly taken his life. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that looked so much like his father's, lit up with immediate recognition. "Mom," Carlos said, his voice hoarse but clear. "You found me." Maria crossed the room in a few quick steps, dropping to her knees beside his wheelchair. Her hands reached for him, trembling as they touched his face, his shoulders, his hands, confirming he was real, solid, alive. "I never stopped looking," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Never." Carlos smiled, that slightly lopsided smile she'd thought she'd never see again. "I knew you wouldn't," he said. "That's why I kept trying to call." The physical therapist quietly excused herself, and Dr. Torres and Detective Patel stepped back, giving mother and son a moment of privacy in their very public reunion. "How did you do it?" Maria asked, still holding his hands tightly. "The phone. Calls? How did you reach me?" Carlos's expression turned serious. "It wasn't easy. I was so confused when I first woke up. They told me I'd been in an accident, that I'd been in a coma for months, that my name was Patient 723. But I knew who I was. I knew you were out there somewhere." He gestured to his legs, which remained motionless in the wheelchair. "I couldn't walk, could barely move my arms at first. But at night, when the nurses were on break, there was a phone at the nurses' station. I managed to drag myself there a few times." His face showed a flash of pride. "It took me weeks to build up enough strength, but I did it." "But how did you know my number?" How did you know about the funeral? Maria asked, still struggling to piece everything together. I overheard the doctors talking, Carlos explained. They kept files on all of us, our real identities, our families, newspaper clippings about our deaths. I found mine one night when they left a tablet unattended. That's how I learned I'd had a funeral, that everyone thought I was dead. His eyes grew distant. It was like reading about someone else's life, but it was mine. Maria shook her head in disbelief. All this time, you were fighting to reach me, and I was visiting an empty grave. Not empty, Carlos corrected her gently. You were talking to me, just in the wrong place. I felt it somehow. He squeezed her hand. But now you found me. You did what seemed impossible. Dr. Torres stepped forward apologetically. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Carlos has been through a lot today. He should rest soon. Can I take him home? Maria asked immediately. Dr. Torres hesitated. Not quite yet. He still needs specialized care and therapy. His recovery is remarkable, but ongoing. But you can visit every day, and we're preparing for his eventual discharge, maybe in a few weeks if his progress continues. I'm not leaving him again, Maria said firmly, a year of grief and determination hardening her resolve. We've arranged accommodations for family members, Dr. Torres assured her. There's a small apartment on site where you can stay. As they talked, Detective Patel's phone buzzed. He checked it and gave Maria a meaningful look. Mrs. Alvarez, the press conference is scheduled to start in an hour. As we discussed, the national media had been following the empty coffin case with rabid interest, but Maria had refused all interview requests until now. Today, after reuniting with Carlos, she had agreed to make one public statement alongside the authorities, hoping to bring attention to the other families still searching for answers. I'll be there, she promised Patel. Then turning back to Carlos, I have to go for a little while, but I'll be back very soon. I'm never leaving you again. Carlos nodded, understanding in his eyes. Go. Tell them what happened. There are others like me, Mom. Other families who don't know. With a final embrace that she felt in her very bones, Maria reluctantly left Carlos with Dr. Torres and followed Detective Patel back to the facility entrance. As they walked, Patel updated her on the latest developments. The investigation has, expanded to 3 other hospitals in the network, he said. We've identified at least 4 more potential cases of patients who may have been diverted into similar unauthorized research programs, and the legal team at Sacred Heart is in complete disarray. They're facing at least a dozen lawsuits already. What about Dr. Bryant? Maria asked. Cooperating fully now that he sees which way the wind is blowing, Patel replied with a hint of satisfaction. The hospital administration is trying to paint him as a rogue actor, but his documentation suggests they knew exactly what was happening. This is going to be one of the biggest medical ethics scandals of the decade. Maria nodded absently, her mind already back with Carlos. The details of lawsuits and investigations seemed distant and unimportant now that she had found her son, yet she knew the fight wasn't over. Not just for justice, but for Carlos's recovery and for the other families still searching for their loved ones. 1 year later, Maria and Carlos stood together at Sacred Heart Cemetery. Carlos leaned on a cane, his steps slow but steady, a vast improvement from the wheelchair he'd used during their reunion. Physical therapy had restored much of his mobility, though doctors said he would likely always walk with a slight limp. His cognitive recovery had been even more impressive. His memory and speech nearly back to normal despite occasional struggles with complex tasks. They stood before his old grave, now filled in and marked with a simple plaque explaining that no remains were present. The local government had created a small memorial garden around it, dedicated to the victims of medical malpractice and unethical research. It feels strange, Carlos said, staring at his own name carved in granite. Looking at your own grave. I still come here sometimes, Maria admitted. Out of habit, I suppose, and to remind myself never to stop questioning when something feels wrong. Their story had sparked a national conversation about medical ethics, patient rights, and hospital oversight. Sacred Heart Memorial was under new management after most of the board had resigned in disgrace. Dr. Bryant and 3 other physicians were serving prison sentences, while reforms to patient identification protocols were being implemented in hospitals nationwide. Maria and Carlos had filed a landmark lawsuit that had been settled for an undisclosed sum, enough to cover Carlos's ongoing medical needs and to create a foundation supporting families of victims of medical misconduct. Elena's son, now a curious 1-year-old, was indeed named after his uncle, but with a different middle name to avoid bad luck. "Ready to go?" Maria asked, looping her arm through her son's. Carlos nodded, taking one last look at the grave that had never held him. "Yes. I've spent enough time in the past. I'm ready for whatever comes next." Together they walked slowly back to the car, each step a small miracle that neither took for granted. Their story had no neat ending. Carlos still faced challenges, the trauma of their experience lingered, and the system that had failed them remained imperfect despite reforms. But they had each other, and after everything they'd been through, that felt like enough of a miracle to sustain them through whatever came next.